Did I say guest? Dang it.
Yeah,
Let me
I'm
re-record
good.
that then.
No,
Co-host is what I was trying to say. Let's start over.
all
Let's
right.
start over.
We're clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
Welcome back to Crosstabs. I'm Reagan Canope here with my co-host Bryan Iverson. How are you doing today, Bryan?
Great, Reagan. Thanks for coming on line together. I think it's going to be interesting to talk about these results. I feel like they're kind of lackluster from what I think we were expecting, but it'll be interesting. We're going to run through them, talk about them, see where we think things are at. But it'll be fun. We'll kind of go through them all. But let's start first with what we both want to talk about, which is turnout. Oh, just kind of horrible. I'm looking at the website now, and it'll probably tink up to maybe 32% voter turnout. I mean, that's just horrible. I mean, that's not even a million votes, and it's better in some other counties and horrible in others. But the reality is, voters don't care. Voter apathy is really at an all-time low. From what we can look at from turnout, I mean, it was very difficult. Republicans, Democrats, you name it. There was a few shiny spots, I think, in the turnout that I saw, but they're usually tied to either hotly contested congressional primaries or something along those lines. But even there, in some counties, it was still not good at all. So, what was your take on it?
Well, when you were talking about the numbers, I pulled up voter turnout history of primary elections. So I would say this feels to me a lot like 2012. 2012 was that really sleepy Romney, Obama. It was already determined. Everybody knew what was happening. And we had voter turnout of about 38%. And that was still higher than this year. But then we had 2016 was 53% turnout in the primary. And 2020 was 46% turnout in the primary. 2008, the year Obama and Clinton were going at it for the presidential, 58% participation. So I agree with you, Bryan. This is a low watermark. I don't know if it is a trend or if it's just this particular election year, but there's just, you could sense the apathy out there. And I think that allowed certain groups and types of voters, to increase their turnout a little bit and have big results because of it. I think in a lot of races where you didn't have the vote split, you had a lot of these close fights. But if there was vote splitting, I think then you had one candidate who kind of stood above. And we'll look at that as we go into these election results. But before we get into that, because that's what everybody's here for, we should start with some gratuitous self-promotion, Bryan. On Crosstabs, I'll link up an email I sent out. You and I were both quoted. You intentionally were quoted in the Capitol Chronicle about some results. I tweeted, which is always a mistake. We did a little bit of talking about some of these results, and I just wanted to know if there was anything in there you wanted to cover to kind of, paint the broad picture before we go into race by race.
Yeah, I think the broad stroke of that, and that was really what I talked with Dirk at OPB as well as Julie Shumway, and I think they're trying to get the sense of things, right? Like what is, because I think everybody beyond the turnout numbers, and even with the turnout numbers, I was just looking at it too, of the near million, 400,000 of those votes came in 3 counties around Portland. So really 40% of our voter turnout is Portland metro area, which is, again, we're not going to have any change in Oregon if we allow those 3 counties to dictate what happens in the state. So, but I didn't get into that with the media. My biggest thing with the media is I think Julia and I got into it a little bit, talking about the difference between Southern Oregon Republicans and Eastern Oregon Republicans, and kind of maybe that mainstream versus that obstructionist kind of Republican mentality. And I thought it was a pretty interesting conversation, one that I even told her maybe she'll have to come on the podcast and we could talk about it a little bit more and just kind of really dive into that a little bit, because I think there really was something to that that allowed certain groups within groups, right? So you have these smaller circles within bigger circles that really were able to find, footholds and stuff, and I think that was pretty kind of interesting. But they're very micro niche kind of stuff, and I think it really goes to what I really liked what you said in that Dick Hughes piece, or that you tweeted that he referenced, which you and I are going to really dive into, is when do we as Republicans give up on an issue? And I think what happened, and like you referenced in your article or your tweet that he referenced, which I thought was really interesting, is the stolen election from 2020, right? Like we've been vote by mail in Oregon now 24 years. Basically, we've been doing it, perfecting it. I think from a county clerk level, they're getting better at it. There's been some changes and some nuances that I don't think you or I are on board with either. Motor voter stuff, things like that have really kind of taken away the participation trophy or given people the participation trophy from actually saying this is your civic duty to vote. And I think the participation trophy mentality of voting creates bad outcomes. Whereas if people want to participate and they're forced to, if they need to go vote by mail, great. But that idea of showing up at the school or what have you and voting is just kind of lost, that civic duty, that responsibility. And that's why I think we're seeing the downward trend in turnout, because we're seeing this number of ballots going out the door, and it's really causing some issues. And I think we really need to dive into those issues that are causing people to not want to vote, versus because the candidates clearly aren't making people show up in droves. So especially with the Trump versus Biden scenario, like you talked about with 2012 Reagan, I really see that just was, everybody's just kind of like, well, that's kind of where I'm at on it. I mean, I know I probably rambled there a little bit, but it's just this confluence of, I can't put my finger on exactly what it is, but there's something that these voters are just saying, I don't give a shit.
Bryan, you've ever had one of those off days where you're like, it doesn't just feel right, but you don't really know why, and you just go to bed early and hope it goes away tomorrow? That's what I feel like this election was like. It was like, man, I just kind of weird, kind of feel a little off, didn't feel quite right, and we're just going to hope it's gone by November. And I don't know if it will be, because again, like you were saying, it's hard to pinpoint. And I think I agree with you, Bryan. I appreciate you adding a little bit of clarification. My point was not that our voting system is perfect and that all the changes that made to it are good. My point was this key plank that Republicans keep talking about, keep running on, keep emphasizing about how the 2020 election is stolen and there's rampant fraud everywhere. It's not landing with voters. So, and I haven't seen a lot of evidence either for it. People are throwing things out there that are easily explained by our laws and by changes in voter and behavior and people moving from region to region. Okay. And I think as long as we're going to have members of, the Republican Party that keep running on this, I think we're just going to keep losing as a party. I think there are some real challenges. I think ballot harvesting is bad. I think we need to get rid of it. But before we do that, we have to win elections. And if voters don't care or don't seem to be enthused on this point, let's drop it for now. We bring it back up when it matters. Bring it back up when there's an actual issue. Bring it back up when voters are interested in dealing with it. But they have other priorities right now. The economy, the border, boys playing and girls sports. All of these issues, I think, are popping up a lot more than the election issue. We have ranked choice voting on the ballot this fall, and that'll give us a lot of opportunity to talk about it. I think that's even worse for elections. I think that's going to generate more confusion, more apathy. But I think for now, we'll talk about the results. And then as we move through this campaign, I think we'll have more to discuss on that front.
Do you believe, because I'm curious your thoughts on this, confusion is something that Democrats intentionally try to do? Or do you think confusion for the voters is just basically makes it easier for incumbents, makes it easier for the ruling class of either party to retain control? Is that the goal
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer for that. I'll just say that I think the progressive movement, especially that really dominates in Oregon, is very aggressive about making changes to things really quickly. And that tends to frustrate voters who move a lot slower. And so I don't know if that's the intention, but a lot of times that's the outcome, generating confusion, not caring about, I would say, not caring about the consequences. Sometimes I see that, especially with some of these big legislation that they push through, and they're told about these potential unintended consequences, and they seem to move forward without giving a lot of thought to those. So I would say they don't seem to be concerned with considering and accounting for potential unintended consequences. They move aggressively and then they fix stuff that's broken, but they never take the blame for making that stuff broken in the first place. I think that's my frustration. But I think a lot of people probably see it the way that you brought it out, Bryan, where they're trying to cause confusion. That confusion allows them to operate effectively. I mean, you know this, Bryan, if you've got an issue you don't really like to deal with, political consultants and strategists will try to muddy the waters to make it confusing. And then it helps you to be able to move on from the issue that doesn't work to the issue that does. So that could very well be a strategy.
We'll definitely dive in that ranked choice voting some more as we move through the summer and stuff. I think we'll maybe even have an expert on that can even explain it to people. I just don't. I think people in general they want to vote for good government measures and bills. Like people feel like, oh, I want to vote for that. That sounds like good government. People want better government, and so when you couch something in a way that makes people think it's good government or it's good policy, then they're going to vote for it. And I just, without, to your point, the unintended consequences of the outcome of that. And I think that that's really going to be where ranked choice voting gets into, is how do we defeat something when a voter base is already going to believe that ranked choice voting it's going to be couched as this, oh, it's a great idea, it's good government, it's going to make better government. And everybody wants better government. I think that's fairly universal, besides a few obstructionists that don't want government at all. But yeah, it should be interesting. Well, let's not digress into that, because you and I are probably pretty good at digressing. And let's maybe pivot in and talk about, let's talk about the politicos first. Let's talk about the pundits, because they're more fun. Did they get it right? Did they get it wrong? Because then we can be critical of what they did. I think that's more fun than talking about whether we got it right or wrong, because I think we were close to 100%. I mean, I don't know, but my math has me pretty close.
I'm looking at my notes. I bolded in my notes, Bryan, all the candidates that we picked. And for the most part, with a couple of exceptions, the conventional wisdom really dominated in this election. And so we'll probably have pretty high percentages, would be my guess. But I would say there's one person who I feel like even when he's getting it right, he's getting it wrong. And I just want to talk about this because he was quoted in the article with me, is Jim Moore. He is a political pundit. Let me see what he's got a title in here somewhere. Hold on, I'm pulling it up.
Political outreach director at Pacific University or something like
Pacific, and he's one of these guys that is always able to give a quote to journalists, and that's probably why they like him, because he's accessible. That's an important thing for journalists. If you're accessible, you're going to get used, you're going to get quoted, you're going to be used as a source, all that kind of stuff. But man, Jim does one of two things, because I don't think he's ever run a political campaign. This comes up, Bryan. We keep bringing this up. Yes. People who've never run political campaigns, commenting on them, it just never goes well because they don't have the experience. Go run at least one of these campaigns somewhere for some issue, for some candidate, and then come back and tell me what you learned. Because I don't think that Jim has run a campaign, unless I don't know, deep in his history, but it's been too long. Because Jim Moore has two types of quotes, okay? Jim Moore, number one, is stating the obvious in the most obvious way possible. And that's what he does about 50% of the time. And I should go through and just pull up some of these quotes that just make me crazy about how the person with the most votes is probably going to win this election. Yeah, Jim, thank you. Thank you for that one. Voters might be simple, but we're not that simple. And then there's the other half where he's just totally wrong. Just completely outright, straight up wrong. And that's what makes me crazy about how journalists keep going back to him and give these quotes. It's like, are you reading the quote that he sent you and you're still okay with publishing it? And it makes me crazy. I mean, have you ever you've read probably 800 Jim Moore quotes in your career, Brian? I mean, am I off base here?
You watch him on was it Your Voice, Your Vote or whatever. I mean, and then all you want to do is jump through the TV screen and punch him, because of what he said, and you're like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Like zero. It's almost like, and he talks about the legislature like he's there all the time. I've been down there for about 5 years now. I mean, solid. I've never seen the guy in the building, and that's the part that really drives me nuts with some of these people. They can literally, you sit at home and read some blogs, and then now you're an expert in political stuff. Like, it's silliness to me. Like, I don't know where the expertise comes from, but it definitely doesn't come from experience.
Here's the quote he had in the article I was also quoted in. We may have had turnout on the lower end of normal, but those voters really knew what they wanted. I'm like, because they checked the box for the candidate they wanted. Like, that's how voting works, man.
How does he know that?
It makes me crazy.
Did he talk to every one of those voters in that area and said, "Oh yeah, I was for sure. I knew who I was voting for"? Like, that's a complete lie. It makes no sense whatsoever about that. I mean, it's just taking these broad strokes and just owning them. So, and he said, one of his primaries he was really watching was that he thought was going to be close was my wife's primary. I remember that was on his blog thing. Yeah, he goes, one, he didn't get the other, and she won 91% of the vote, by the way. Good job. I think she almost did better, and she had two people against her. So, so good luck with that, Jim. So I don't know. I just think the pundits drive me nuts. I think that some of this stuff, I mean, like Betsy Johnson can go out there and I'll listen to her because guess what? She's done it. Like I'll listen to her pontificate about a race or a candidate or something like that because there's some real, experience there, like a lifetime of experience where she's been in the trenches from the legislative side as well as the campaign side. I'll listen to her when she's on the news talking about stuff because she's probably got pretty good ideas and pretty good thoughts because she's been there. But not Jim Moore. Like, waste of time. I don't know what KATU does I don't know how much they pay that guy. I mean, he's got to get paid to be that accessible person. I'm assuming he's paid. I don't know if they have to say that or not. If they're paid, maybe he does it because it's great for Pacific University that he's there. I don't know. I never knew Pacific University was a political science hotbed over there. So who knows?
Too frustrating. All right. So we started, Brian, with our predictions and our prep. In very first episode 1, we talked about the statewide and congressional. So let's run through those. Secretary of State. Brian, I will say I wasn't surprised that Tobias Reed won, but I was surprised at how much he absolutely dominated State Senator James Manning, including in his home county of Lane County.
I'm with you. I thought it would be a little tighter. I mean, just maybe it's it seemed like Manning was doing some stuff. I saw things where he was going around and talking to, the central committees and that sort of stuff. So he was doing some of the work, but I tells you Tobias being on the statewide ballot for, and I think the primary helped him, the Democrat governor's primary last time. I think that probably helped him out a lot as well, but sure looks like this one's already over before it started in the general. So as well. So I would say that Tobias is our new Secretary of State.
I think that's absolutely right, Brian. I mean, you look at this, not that these are always correct, but almost 400,000 votes cast statewide in this primary versus 275 for the Republicans. You'll see a similar margin probably statewide. And the journalists will probably be on Linthicum pretty hard about election denialism in the meantime. And that's probably not going to work for him in a Secretary of State race.
Well, and he didn't, and neither Manning's voters will come over to Tobias's voter. I mean, there was no negativity within their primaries or anything, so there won't be any sort of voter fallout at all on this side of it. And you and I talked about it. I mean, as far as Democrats go, Tobias has been a fairly decent treasurer. I don't think there hasn't been any issues in his office. Nobody's suspected him of fraud or malfeasance like we've had in the Secretary of State's office. So I think it'll that's probably helped him out a lot. There's not a lot of, this is probably one of those times in a treasurer's office where you want zero controversy. You want zero Willamette Week articles about your office. And so for 8 years, he's done a pretty good job of that. So I think it's going to be a pretty difficult road for Senator Lithicum to hoe in trying to beat Tobias in the general. But, we'll maybe have both of them on and talk about it. And we'll see what they got to say about it.
The only person probably who's been critical of Tobias Reed is Jeff Goodman, running for state treasurer, and he just got also absolutely smoked by Elizabeth Steiner. And I was hearing from my Portland area Democrat friends who are texting me. They're like, Jeff Goodman, a Democrat, ? Because he'd appeared on the ballot a couple times as a Republican. And this is one of those ones where I wasn't sad to see. If you look at it, do you think Jeff Goodman would have been more of a Republican-style treasurer than Senator Steiner? Sure. But here, he switched parties, and I'm not okay with it. The reasons that he did it aren't good reasons to me. And so I'm glad to see him get just absolutely demolished here. This is another one of those ones where we talked about Steiner and Boquist, both sort of giants in their parties, been around the legislature and the legislative process a long time, both real quality people. I think that we should try to get them on the podcast too. I think it would be great. Maybe we'll host the only debate for this entire election, and maybe we'll only have 10 people listen.
I was going to say it might be our lowest listened to podcast, but you and I would love it. And I think, well, we probably have 60 or 70 of the legislative body. They would listen to it. They'd probably find it interesting because it is such inside baseball and the treasurer stuff. But my thought was I found it very interesting that the Oregonian endorsed Goodman over Steiner. Like, that was like, what did they see that the rest of the voting population saw, that this was going to be a Steiner versus Boquist race? That's what I would ask the Oregonian. What did you guys hear, or what made you upset about Steiner? That Senator Steiner, that you went with Goodman? Because I don't know, that's a huge fail if you ask me on their part. I mean, dude got 20% of the vote. Like, can't endorse for somebody that's basically a non sequitur. Maybe they did it just to make it seem like they were contrarian. I don't know. Who knows? But I doubt it.
Bryan, I agree with you. And I feel like I was talking to somebody not that long ago about how terrible it is for your campaign to be endorsed by the Oregonian, but I might just be misremembering that. Oh wait, that was you, Bryan. Yeah, no idea what they saw. No idea what they saw, honestly. They're again, conventional wisdom in the Attorney General primaries prevails. We got Dan Rayfield and we got Will Lathrop, which again, even though it's third ranked on the list here, seems likely to be one of the more interesting races at the top of the ticket. And I think we'll see how that one develops. Any thoughts on the AG race?
I agree. I think what the problem with this AG race, I believe, is you're going to have two, I think, very well-liked candidates, from the business community, from those sort of folks. Rayfield built a pretty good relationship base across the aisle in a bunch of different areas. And I think everybody likes Will's story. I think that the numbers are clearly tilted in Rayfield's camp on this one, but Will's done a good job. I think he did a good job getting around the state. I think he's got a great story. I think he's got a great idea. I just don't know, in a presidential election, can he make enough people counterintuitive to the Trump v. Biden scenario to get them to switch and vote Republican if they voted for Biden? That's going to be pretty interesting. Could be a money issue in this race as well. I think that Rayfield has proven that he can tear the doors off of fundraising. So I feel like and I was talking to somebody the other day, I was like, if Will goes out and raises $2 million, Rayfield will raise $4 million. If Will kills it and raises $3 million, Rayfield will raise $9 million. Like, he'll just he'll just raise more. And I think the top cop stuff, the DA races, it seems like there's been something that the Democrats have really tried to move into across the country over the last 10 years. I'm glad Republicans are paying attention to it. I'm excited that Will's, going to give it a good go. I've donated to his campaign. So I hope other people out there do as well. So that'd be my pitch for Will. I like the guy. I'm not running his race, not involved, just a lonely old donor.
Now we go to the ones where you and I split on our predictions, but we sort of hedged at the end as we saw the money pour in. Congressional District 3, you had Maxine Dexter with over 50%. Did I get that right, Brian? Hold on, I'm switching over to federal. Over 50% in that primary for Congressional District 3. 47 now.
Not quite. Yeah.
47-32 against Sushila Jayapal with Eddie Morales coming up third, 13%. I think spending decided this race, Brian. I think there are I was listening to OPB's political podcast, and they were talking to Earl Blumenauer about all the massive spending in this race and how bad it is. And Blumenauer said he thought Dexter could have won it without the money. That's maybe true, but Jayapal's close enough there where it's really a question at that point. It gets real competitive real fast.
Did you notice, and I'll answer your question on that with the money, because I think that's interesting, but Dexter had a decisive lead. And then that late 30,000 vote dump from Multnomah County that came in, all Jayapal votes, which I thought was very interesting. So she really closed the gap there in that scenario, which I thought was pretty interesting, because Dexter she was over 50% and then settled back down right after that late dump came in. I think she needed the money. I think 15 points in this race without 600 grand coming in late and just pounding Jayapal on one side and then propping up Dexter at the end. I think the APAC, right? The Jewish PAC that came in and spent a bunch of money on that one. They were significant, and I think it mattered. I think it really mattered, and you couldn't turn on Portland TV without either seeing something bashing Jayapal or something telling you about Dexter. So they clearly knew it was a two-person race. Eddie Morales was never in the mix as this goes. So at least we were correct in picking the top two. I thought she was going to get more support, to be honest, from the Terrace Caucus that her younger sister is a part of. And I thought, she would get some of that, like even videos from AOC or, to really dive into that left-wing contingent of voters. But that really never materialized. So I'm wondering if there were some issues that happened behind the scenes. It'd be great to know if there was something that Jayapal couldn't go and secure, Bernie Sanders, AOC kind of stuff to bring them to the table, because clearly Dexter was able to go get that. So I don't know. I don't know what happened there. And, but poor Eddie just, isn't going to go anywhere, but he's still got a job as a city councilor, so he'll be all right.
I think we'll see Eddie Morales again, almost certainly. And I think the problem with the squad is they've got fame, but they don't have money to back them. They don't have money to spread around a lot of places. Only, AOC and Bernie can raise real money. And a lot of the dollars, they flow elsewhere. I am obligated to point out, Brian, that technically the Israel PAC didn't endorse Dexter, but it sounds like a lot of their donors and money funneled to Dexter and funneled to this other group to sort of keep the Israel thing off to the side of this particular race. But overall, I think this is a better outcome if you're pro-Israel, because I think Dexter is going to be more reasonable.
Reagan, money is a better endorsement than a title.
100%. Okay, so then we go back to the results page and we scroll down and we go to the 4th district primary. Monique Despain, 48%. Amy Ryan Corser, 41%. I'm sorry. Monique Despain, 58%. Yeah. Amy Ryan, 41%. That's about what we expected. Probably a little closer, but I think Monique's probably trying to hold on to some cash, trying not to spend it all in the primary. knowing that she was out there a little bit more, had the backing of the kind of
Mhm.
establishment Republicans and the endorsements, trying to conserve that cash for the fall battle with Val Hoyle.
Yeah, this is one of those where when you look at turnout too, this is where we start seeing depressed turnout, right? CD3 race, had nearly 100,000 Democrat voters to Val Hoyle only getting 70,000 voters. So this just shows you like you got outside of that Portland metro area where there wasn't a contested primary, and it just, the turnout just went to nothing. And I think this one will be interesting. I know the NRCC's tagged this one as a what is it, plus 4D they've called it only. So Val Hoyle's got a little bit of stink still, or at least they're trying to create as much smoke as they can around the LaMotta stuff and keep the fires flaming in that thing. I think Amy Ryan Courser, I think it's probably time to hang up the Spurs, Amy, I think, and just call it a day. She's tried, unless she wants to go. Which one did we say she hasn't ran for? One or two. I guess she could run for Cliff Bence's at some point. So maybe she'll do that one. She's got two more to go. But Monique's, it should be interesting to see what she does here. It was a lot closer than I thought it should have been because Monique spent a decent amount of money, outraised Amy. So that's, I would think, a problem if I'm in that camp. I would be a little concerned about only doing a 58-41 Republican win in that primary, I think, with somebody who spent a couple $100,000 versus Amy at, only raised 10 grand or so. So I think that would be concerning to me if I was a Republican. I think if you're Monique Despain, you got to figure out a way to shore up your base in a hurry if you're going to take a run at Val Hoyle. So we'll see what happens there.
Bryan, you mentioned Amy Ryan Courser needs to hang it up. Speaking of people who need to hang it up, Jamie McLeod Skinner, 29%, got beat in her home base of Deschutes County. Bryan, I don't know about you. This is an embarrassing loss. This is her fourth or fifth run, you totaling her primaries in general elections. She can win a primary when she's got no opponent, but when she has real opposition, just like Secretary of State race 4 years ago, she just gets demolished. And I just think she needs to go to local, she needs to go to state legislature. Same thing with Art Robinson. Couldn't win a congressional race to save his life, drops down to the state legislature, wins immediately, right? There's just, you got to build notoriety and not just an identity, but like a body of work. I think sometimes voters are looking for, what have you done?
Yeah.
And Jamie McLeod Skinner, all she's done is abuse her campaign staff. So I think that's a problem for her, honestly. Janelle Bynum is going to give the match that political consultants secretly wanted to see. The rematch between Bynum and Chavez Dreamer is on. That's going to be probably one of the most watched races in the country, Bryan.
I think Jehoon put on Twitter, who's Lori Chavez Dreamer's chief of staff, said, "Bring it on." So I'm looking forward to that. I think a lot of people kind of wanted to see it, but I really think this was when the Democrat establishment even just said, we've had enough of Jamie McLeod Skinner. But you're right. She could, everybody loves a comeback story. I mean, Alex Carlatos won that House District 4. Nobody even ran against him. And now he's going to be in the state house, and he ran twice for Congress and didn't get anywhere and realized, maybe I need to, start back at the bottom again. And Amy Ryan's probably done that. But the problem there is, when you go to the state house level, it has to be where you live. And then that could be a challenge. So in regards to versus Congress, where you can just kind of pick and choose as long as you live in the state. So we'll see. But I'm done with Jamie McLeod Skinner. I hope that Oregon's done with Jamie McLeod Skinner. And for my own world, I sure hope that Lori Chavez Dreamer makes us done with Janelle Bynum. But we'll see. We'll see how the race translates over the course of time. And that's going to be a barn burner. That's the one thing for sure we know is both sides of the aisle think they can win that race. And they will pour a ton of money into it. And turnout's going to probably dictate that thing.
I agree with you there. So now, just one more quick note. The 6th congressional district went exactly like we expected. Salinas and Erickson did hardly anything, one going away. You look at this one, 47,000 votes in the Democratic primary, 39,000 votes in the Republican primary. The 6 could still be competitive in the fall. And I hate saying that because I said before I didn't think that this one was going to be competitive, but I'm looking at these numbers and going, maybe it's still out there. So we'll see. I think that race will have to develop. We'll see how the polling goes. We'll see how much money gets spent, but could come back. Hey everybody, this is Reagan jumping in here to let you know that this is the end of part 1 of our election results episode. Part 2 coming very soon, covering state legislative elections. Thanks for listening, everybody. Don't forget to visit crosstabs.studio. Sign up to keep up to date with everything that we're doing.